It's a terrible thing to say, but some deaths are born of carelessness. I've seen it again and again in my research. A casual disregard for the power of the natural world, a failure to respect the dangers that animals pose. This video, according to the Tran, examines some of the most terrifying animal attacks in history, and it seems that human error often plays a tragic role. Take, for example, the volunteer handler in Texas, bitten during a rattlesnake roundup, or the backpacker in India, whose tent became a predator's trap. But the story that grips me most is that of Reggie Peters. It was July 21st, 2016, at a palm tree farm near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning was quiet, the air thick with humidity after the previous night's rain. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain, was well regarded for his work improving the water systems. He was a quiet man, known for his solitary walks around the farm, diligently noting problems in a small notebook. He'd been in Indonesia for 4 months, captivated by the local wildlife. He photographed countless insects, birds, and animals, fascinated by the creatures around the farm. Unlike the other workers, Reggie wouldn't scare away snakes or lizards. Instead, he would kneel to observe them closely. On that particular day, Reggie set out to inspect the water ditches, critical to prevent flooding with the approaching rainy season. He carried his notebook, a measuring tape, and his phone. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, saw him near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They joked about the large snakes rumoured to inhabit the water channels. Reggie laughed, saying he'd love to see one up close, dismissing their warnings as mere stories. The palm farm was vast, the rows of trees divided by narrow water channels. The ground, softened by recent rain, was muddy and slippery. Dragonflies hovered over the water, while mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant buzz of chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs. The heat hung heavy, creating an atmosphere of stillness. This area is home to reticulated pythons, some of the largest snakes on Earth. They can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over 200 pounds. These snakes are ambush predators, lying in wait near water for animals like pigs or dogs. Occasionally, they even attack humans, though such incidents are rare in this part of Indonesia. Sadly, these snakes have been moving closer to human activity as their natural habitats are destroyed. The local people knew to be cautious, often carrying long knives for protection when working near the water. By late afternoon, Reggie had not returned to camp. Amir grew concerned and went to the last place he had seen Reggie. The farm was nearly silent, save for the insects. Then Amir saw something that froze him. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. A few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was grotesquely swollen, as if it had consumed a very large animal. Amir stood motionless, then began shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men stood watching the snake as it slowly moved toward the bushes. The swollen midsection dragged heavily, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, trying to poke at the snake from a safe distance. The python hissed loudly, opening its mouth to reveal curved teeth, coiling defensively. The snake was massive, about 15 feet long. None of the workers dared approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men watched the snake carefully. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something stirred inside. I've spent years studying the strange and tragic intersections between humanity and the natural world. Sometimes the most innocent curiosity can turn deadly. I remember reading the story of Clare Johnson, a young graphic designer from Melbourne, and it stayed with me for days. She had saved for 2 years to travel through Asia, dreaming of photographing tigers in India. What happened to her is a chilling reminder of how quickly a dream can become a nightmare. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, Rajasthan. The air was cool after a scorching day. The campsite was dark, lit only by moonlight. Inside one of the tents, Claire and Lara, a German student she'd met on the train, were sleeping, unaware that a snake had silently slipped inside. Claire was adventurous, but careful. She researched her destinations, packed medical supplies, and kept a detailed blog for her family. Ranthambore was a dream for her. She longed to photograph the wild tigers. She'd even seen one that day, a female near a watering hole, though from a distance. She was staying at a basic eco-camp outside the park, in a tent on a raised wooden platform. Claire was meticulous, always shaking out her shoes and ensuring the tent was zipped tight. That evening, she'd zipped the canvas door completely, leaving only a small gap for air. The camp was surrounded by dry grassland, acacia trees, and tall grass, ideal habitat for reptiles hunting in the cool pre-dawn hours. Spectacled cobras are common in Rajasthan, identifiable by the circular pattern on their hoods. They usually avoid people, but sometimes venture into human areas seeking food or warmth. These cobras can grow up to 6 feet long, with venom potent enough to kill a person without prompt treatment. Tour guides always warned campers to check their bedding and clothing. Sometime after 4 a.m., Lara woke to a soft rustling near the bottom of the tent. Half asleep, she turned on her phone's flashlight. The beam revealed a spectacled cobra coiled inches from Claire's sleeping bag, its head raised slightly. Before Lara could react, Claire moved in her sleep, her bare ankle brushing the snake. The cobra bit her twice, its fangs sinking into the soft skin above her heel. The bites were so swift that Lara barely registered them until Claire gasped. Lara screamed, waking the entire camp. Claire sat up, clutching her ankle, where 2 small puncture wounds were visible. Camp workers rushed to the tent with flashlights, spotting the snake as it slithered away. Claire's breathing became rapid and shallow. Witnesses described her eyes as glassy. When she tried to stand, her legs buckled beneath her. Her voice was faint as she described her legs feeling like jelly before collapsing back onto her mat. The camp had no anti-venom. Staff loaded Claire into a jeep for the 40-minute drive to the nearest hospital. Lara accompanied her, pressing a scarf above the bite marks, hoping to slow the venom's spread. Halfway there, Claire stopped responding. Her skin grew pale, cold, and clammy. At the rural clinic, the medical staff delivered the devastating news. There was nothing they could do. Claire's body was eventually taken to Jaipur. Earlier, on a farm far away, something equally disturbing had unfolded. A worker noticed a strange bulge in a reticulated python. It wasn't the shape of a pig or a dog. The workers stepped back, horrified. The police were called, and the decision was made to kill the snake. It took a while and a lot of effort before it finally stopped moving. The police and villagers then cut open the snake's belly. Mud and fluid mixed on the ground. Inside, curled up and covered in slime, was the body of Reggie, a missing worker. His clothes were torn and soaked. Someone filmed the scene, and the video spread before being taken down. Reggie's damaged notebook and phone were found nearby. His body was sent back to Britain. The farm quietly put up new warning signs telling workers not to travel alone. Reggie's cabin was cleaned out, and his belongings were shipped to his family. I've spent years reading accounts of ordinary days turning tragic in a heartbeat. A moment of carelessness, a hidden danger, and suddenly everything changes forever. The story of Jorge Cruz, a lime orchard worker in Mexico, is one of those stories that stays with me. He was a man known for his generosity, a man who felt connected to the earth by working barefoot, and a man whose life ended because of a hidden snake on what seemed like just another hot afternoon. Later that day, after Lara's death, her parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy. They requested that her body be cremated according to local customs. The camp management decided not to close down, but they did hire a local snake expert who began giving weekly talks to new guests. These talks taught people how to properly check their tents and where to keep lights on at night to avoid snake encounters. Lara eventually returned to Germany, and later she wrote a detailed account of what happened on a travel website. Her story served as a warning to other backpackers, urging them to always check their tents, bedding and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. For years, that post was quietly shared, a sobering reminder to travelers who romanticized sleeping close to nature without understanding the real dangers. This incident underscores how crucial it is for travelers to take safety precautions seriously when venturing into wilderness areas. Even experienced and careful travelers like Clare can face unexpected dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. The tragedy serves as a reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. Now, it's September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge Cruz, 42 years old, had worked in this orchard his entire life. He would rise before sunrise every day to check the water systems, prune tree branches, and teach his oldest son how to tell if the fruit was healthy. People in the village knew Jorge as someone they could count on, the kind of person who would fix broken carts for his neighbors and lend them tools without expecting anything in return. Jorge had a lifelong habit. He liked to work without shoes, claiming it helped him feel the ground better and move faster when climbing the lower tree branches. The afternoon was intensely hot, the air heavy. The sun beat down so fiercely that nothing seemed to move. This orchard had belonged to the same family for generations. On this particular day, the normal work routine would be shattered by something that would change everything in just one moment. Jorge was working with two neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove, where workers had recently created a pile of cut tree branches after clearing the area. The three men joked about the heat as they moved between the low branches, filling bags with limes. Jorge wore his wide hat pushed back on his head and an old faded shirt. Reaching for a low branch, he shifted his weight to pull the fruit closer. The ground in the orchard was hard dirt covered with cut leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low tree tops cast long, shifting shadows across the ground. It was very quiet, so small sounds like fruit falling or clothes brushing against tree bark were easily heard. The men were focused on their work and conversation, not paying attention to potential dangers. A type of poisonous snake called the Tersopilobropsaspa, locally known as the naka, lives in Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied and typically grow to be 3 to 5 feet long. They possess a highly dangerous venom that destroys skin and muscle, causes severe bleeding at the bite site, and can affect blood clotting and blood prees throughout the body. These snakes blend seamlessly with fallen leaves and often remain completely still until someone steps very close. Their bite usually causes extreme pain and rapid swelling. That morning, neighbors had mentioned seeing more snakes because of the recent rains. Jorge's wife had even told him to wear boots while clearing brush and debris. The pile of cut branches where they were working was a perfect temporary hiding place for snakes. Raúl later said he had warned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge dismissed their concerns, saying he would work quickly. As Jorge shifted his position, the snake attacked instantly. It burst from the leaves and bit the skin just above his ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge cry out sharply and saw him pull his foot back, grabbing at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood stained the dirt where his foot had been. The pain hit Jorge immediately, and it was excruciating. He doubled over, dropping the fruit he was holding. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, and the skin started to look bruised and discolored. He began vomiting and sweating heavily, his face turning pale. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they stabilized Jorge's leg with a splint made from a broom handle. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, pushing it toward the dirt road that led back to the village. The trip to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust covered Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused, speaking incoherently and drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg, noting his weak pulse and low blood press. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no anti-venom, the specific medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to call the regional health center, requesting help, but the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition worsened. He became increasingly disoriented, and his breathing grew shallow. The medical staff were unable to help him improve. By evening, Jorge had died at the clinic despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and help him breathe. Raúl said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick pile of leaves. It's chilling to think about how a familiar place can suddenly turn dangerous. I remember reading about a village where, after a tragic incident, a river bend was considered cursed for weeks. Fishermen wouldn't cast their nets there. Before that, a man named Jorge had been bitten by ants. His phone and notebook were returned to his family, stained reminders of what had happened. Soon after, a traveling vet came to the village with anti-venom. He taught the locals how to make splints, apply press bandages, and understand when to use tourniquets. The villagers marked the brush pile where it happened, a simple pole, a testament to Jorge's absence. His wife wore his hat during harvests, a visible echo. From then on, each harvest began with a reminder to be careful. Then there's the story of Mina Belagan. It was May 2nd, 2018, near the Cross River. She was 19, back from university. She loved swimming in the river with her cousins, despite warnings about snakes being more active in the dry season. She thought nothing bad could happen in the shallows. That day, she convinced 4 cousins to join her. She dreamed of starting a community project to teach kids to swim safely. She saw the river as a place of life, not danger. The water was calm, reflecting the sky, but locals knew something was always moving beneath. The part of the river they chose had muddy banks, popular with fishermen. Dragonflies hovered over the surface. The plants cast long shadows over the deeper water. Earlier that week, a fisherman had warned Mina's uncle about a large python sunning itself on a log. Children were told not to swim until the rains came, but Mina insisted the shallows were safe. She'd been in the water for almost an hour when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. They thought it was a branch, but then it curved, silently moving across the surface. An enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed, its jaws locking onto Mina's side before its body wrapped around her. Her cousin screamed as the coils tightened. The water turned violent as Mina fought, then went still as the python dragged her deeper. The children ran back to the village, screaming for help. The men grabbed their knives and ran to the river. They found the snake still moving. Mina pulled deep underwater. They cut at the python until it finally let her go. They pulled her onto the bank, but she'd been underwater too long. Her skin was cold, her lips blue. They tried pressing on her chest, blowing air into her mouth, but it was no use. Water mixed with mud came from her mouth and nose. Someone recorded the scene, the sounds of shouting, rushing water, and knives hitting the snake. Mina's body was placed on a mat. The riverbend remained empty for weeks. Fishermen called it cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies. I've seen the most experienced people make mistakes. Years of steady work, practical knowledge. None of it guarantees safety when dealing with nature. I remember reading about Sammy, a seasoned snake handler, and how local people trusted him because he was so careful. He never rushed, always corrected mistakes gently. But one year, the festival was bigger, the schedule tighter. He'd skipped breakfast, spent the morning in the sun, moving between snake pits, answering questions. He felt tired, but kept going, thinking it was just the heat. They used shallow pits for the snakes, surrounded by temporary barriers. The air was thick with fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water were nearby, but everything was cramped. People leaned against the fence, phones up, recording every move. It was designed for clear viewing, but that meant less space for the handlers, fewer chances to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes. Those are strong snakes, 4 to 5 feet long. Their venom, it causes tissue damage, bleeding, and can send the body into shock. Even skilled handlers can get bitten when a snake is stressed, or when the heat and constant handling get to it. Earlier that day, organizers had warned everyone to take breaks, limit handling in the heat. There had even been a small accident that morning. Medical personnel were standing by with IV fluids and anti-venom. Sammy heard the warnings, but the crowd, the schedule. He went back to work. He took a heavy diamondback, stepped into the pit with his glove and hook, lifted the snake with a practiced motion. For a moment, the crowd relaxed, but then the snake twisted, lunged, and its fangs went into the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. The pain. It must have been intense. He signaled he was, but his face turned red. Sweat formed. He kept talking to the crowd for a few minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite swelled quickly. Discoloration spread down his arm. Within minutes, the swelling moved past his elbow, toward his shoulder. The skin darkened with bruising as the tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent. Paramedics applied press, started IV fluids, pushed anti-venom. But his breathing turned shallow, his skin cold, blotched with bruising. Despite their efforts, his blood press collapsed. His pulse faded. He died before the airlift could arrive. Afterward, his friends organized training sessions, invited medics to review emergency procedures. A younger relative began helping at the pits, prioritizing breaks and hydration over putting on a show. The festival board documented everything and created a checklist for demonstrations, maximum handling time, required breaks, and a fast evacuation plan. It reminds me of another story, one that took place far away in the rainforests of Cameroon. It was March 15th, 2016, a place where mahogany trees stretch endlessly under the humid canopy. Hidden near the Sangha River was a converted logging camp, isolated on abandoned land. It had once been a legitimate primate research station, but those days were gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer, had been running the facility illegally for 3 years after her permits expired. She refused to surrender Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Erica's demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her notorious with local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about inspections, refused to acknowledge her expired permits. With no formal primate training, she relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she tried to discipline Caesar using intimidation. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches and damaging his enclos. Local villagers reported loud chest beating at night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. The Cameroon Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays. I've seen the reports, the photos. I still can't quite grasp the unimaginable force contained within these creatures. The strength of a fully grown Western lowland gorilla is something to behold, something almost beyond comprehension. They say a male can possess the strength of 10 humans, but strength without proper care, without understanding. That's where tragedy often begins. I remember reading about Erica back in 2017. She was working at an illegal wildlife facility in Cameroon. I recall the case so vividly because of the sheer horror of what happened. Months before the incident, warning signs had been mounting. Caesar, the Western lowland gorilla she was caring for, was showing classic signs of psychological distress from improper captivity. These animals require specialized care that few private individuals can truly provide. On that evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar was ignoring her commands. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod and entered his enclos. That decision proved fatal. Caesar's behavior shifted instantly. He charged. The 375-pound silverback slammed into her with terrifying speed. His hands, his teeth. The reports detailed the unspeakable. He severed her ear, crushed her fingers, snapped her femur. Finally, he crushed her skull. The silverback then sat calmly beside the lifeless body for 4 hours, grooming blood from his hands. It sparked a debate, a renewed debate, about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. It reminds me of another case, this one from July 22, 2017. It happened along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River. The Price family had gone on their annual camping adventure. But this trip was different. They brought Scout, a mountain cougar cub Landon had purchased from an exotic animal dealer. Landon was overconfident, convinced that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. It's a fatal mistake to assume that a wild animal, even one raised in captivity, loses its inherent instincts. I've seen it time and again in my research. The story of Landon and Scout is a stark reminder. Landon tragically misjudged Scout, a 3-year-old cougar, believing that its upbringing had somehow tamed its wild nature. He treated this predator like a house cat. It was when Landon released Scout from the transport crate, wanting to let the cougar stretch in the wilderness, that everything went wrong. As the family set up their fishing gear, Scout began surveying the unfamiliar territory. His coat blended with the brush. His yellow eyes scanned, cataloguing every movement. When Landon walked toward the river, Scout's predatory instincts kicked in. The cougar crouched behind a log, muscles coiling. His tail twitched, a hunting pattern. Then, in complete silence, he launched himself, covering 20 feet in a single leap, striking Landon in the back. The cougar's claws sank into Landon's shoulders. His jaws clamped onto the back of Landon's neck, severing the spinal cord. Landon was paralyzed instantly, face submerged, and he drowned within 90 seconds. Scout, driven by millions of years of evolution, dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush. Sarah, Landon's wife, grabbed their children and rushed to the safety of their locked truck, waiting for 3 hours until park rangers arrived. an investigation began into the illegal possession of the cougar, and the incident reignited debates about exotic animal ownership. Another case that comes to mind occurred on September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch in South Texas. Marcus Ellison, a 41-year-old oil rig worker, had converted a barn into a makeshift big cat facility. His girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a veterinary technician, grew concerned about their unusual housemate, Luna, a jaguar. Marcus had purchased Luna as a cub from a black market dealer 4 years earlier. He believed their bond would protect him, but Lisa had been pressuring him to surrender Luna, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. Luna had been refusing food, marking territory, and pacing obsessively. Neighbors reported strange vocalizations at night. Jaguars are powerful predators with the strongest bite force of any feline. Unlike other big cats, they deliver killing bites directly through the skull or spine. Even hand-raised jaguars retain their wild instincts and can become aggressive. Marcus made a fatal mistake when he entered Luna's enclosure without backup. He wanted to investigate her food refusal, believing their bond would keep him safe. He unlocked the gate and stepped inside, carrying only a flashlight. Luna sat motionless, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam. She had been waiting. As Marcus knelt and extended his hand, Luna's predatory instincts took over. Her muscles propelled her across the enclosure. I've spent years studying the complex relationships between humans and animals, but certain cases still haunt me. The story of Marcus, for example. Luna, the jaguar, struck with the force of a battering ram, sending him crashing backward. His flashlight skittered away, leaving him in darkness as Luna went for the kill. Her jaws locked around his throat with surgical precision. The jaguar's bite force crushed Marcus's windpipe instantly, cutting off his air supply. His arteries were severed, causing massive blood loss. He lost consciousness within 30 seconds. Luna maintained her grip for 3 full minutes, ensuring her prey was subdued. Only then did she release her hold and begin to feed. Lisa discovered the horrific scene the following morning. Luna sat calmly in the corner, grooming blood from her paws and face, while Marcus's partially consumed body lay in the center of the pen. It was a grim testament to the power of wild instincts. The incident sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership in Texas. Marcus's family released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping wild predators as pets, urging others to learn from their tragic loss. Then there's the story of Brianna Ellis. It was June 14th, 2018, in a suburban neighborhood of Homestead, Florida. Behind a modest rental house sat an elaborate backyard pond system, home to one of nature's most dangerous predators. Brianna, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, was using this location for her thesis research on reptilian behavior patterns. She shared the property with her friends Kevin and Amanda. 2 years earlier, Brianna had rescued Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator, from a failing roadside attraction. She believed she could safely study Brutus while providing him proper care. The landlord remained completely unaware that a 350-pound apex predator was living in his backyard pond. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times. Neighbours had been complaining about strange splashing sounds, and Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behaviour. American alligators are among the most efficient predators on Earth, perfectly evolved killing machines. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pres per square inch. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began setting. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond earlier that day, and insisted on entering the water to retrieve it herself. This decision proved catastrophic, as dusk represents the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, Brutus began his approach with the stealth that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. Brianna bent down to retrieve her equipment, unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface as he prepared for his explosive assault. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward, his massive jaws opening wide. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, crushing her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The powerful alligator spun his body rapidly, tearing Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again. His jaws clamped down on her torso, puncturing her rib cage. I've often wondered about the moment when instinct takes over, when the wild asserts itself with absolute force. I've seen it described in old journals, but it's different to read about it than to truly imagine it. A woman named Brianna found herself in that terrible moment when an alligator, Brutus, dragged her into the depths of a pond. The thrashing went on for nearly 2 minutes, until she was gone. The dive team only recovered scattered remains. Brutus retreated to the deepest part of the pond with his kill. The authorities began to investigate the illegal possession of a dangerous reptile, while wildlife officials worked to capture and relocate the animal. Local ordinances regarding exotic animal ownership in residential areas were changed immediately. It brings me to another case, one that unfolded on October 3, 2016, in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin sat nestled among the dense forest, accessible only by a narrow dirt road. This isolated retreat was home to Sean Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator whose career had ended in disgrace 3 years earlier. He was a bitter and increasingly paranoid man. He'd retreated to this inherited family property after losing his rehabilitation license following a previous bear incident that left him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 m and possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their powerful jaws can exert over 800 pounds of press per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls, while their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15-20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room, carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his rib cage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the prez, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an investigation. There's a story I read once that still haunts me. A stark reminder of the unpredictable nature lurking beneath the surface of even the closest bonds we think we forge with the wild. It began with an illegal black bear, tranquilized and moved to a sanctuary. But that wasn't the story that stuck with me. The real story began on the outskirts of Houston, Texas, on March 22, 2015. The air was thick that day, heavy with the humidity of early spring. Inside a chain-link enclave, behind a small ranch-style house, a Bengal tiger paced restlessly. Michael Torres, a 41-year-old mechanic, was known for his patience, a man who preferred the company of engines to people. He'd lived alone since his divorce, filling his time with old cars and a growing collection of animals. It started small, with ball pythons and iguanas, but eventually led to Raha, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger acquired from a private breeder. He kept Raja in a large, reinforced enclosure, and neighbors often saw him walking beside the tiger, talking to it like a friend. Michael believed Raja recognized his scent, his tone, and claimed the animal would never hurt him. When asked about the risk, he'd simply say it was about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon, the air was still and heavy. The enclosure smelled of straw and damp soil. A friend, Luis Alvarez, stopped by to borrow a wrench and watched as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, his tail lashing, eyes following every movement. Construction noise from a nearby property echoed through the air. Michael mentioned the tiger disliked loud sounds, but would settle down once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers, apex predators, possess a bite capable of crushing bone with over 1,000 pounds of prise. Even those raised from cubs retain their hunting instincts. Male tigers can weigh over 400 pounds and strike with enough force to shatter ribs, often without warning. Luis stood about 20 yards away as Michael opened the inner gate, intending to replace old straw. The outer gate was left partially open for convenience. Luis later recounted how Raja's muscles tensed with each pass along the fence. Michael glanced up, muttered something, and bent to lift a shovel. Then Luis saw the tiger freeze mid-stride, ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact, a sickening mix of metal and flesh, knocked Michael flat. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed, clamping its jaws around Michael's neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted, throwing a wrench that clattered uselessly off the fencing. Michael swung the shovel, striking Raja's snout, but the tiger's jaws only tightened. Luis grabbed gravel, hurling it and screaming for the tiger to stop. Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja continued biting, dragging the body by the shoulder until it was half under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. Deputies arrived 10 minutes later, holding position until animal control arrived with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, an officer fired his service rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm had been partially severed, his face unrecognizable. Investigators noted the lack of a secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister quietly handled arrangements, declining interviews. Fewer than 20 people attended the funeral. Neighbors left flowers at the fence. The straw inside still stained dark where the attack happened. Another story, equally unsettling, unfolded in Surabaya, Indonesia, on January 14, 2016. The morning air hung heavy with humidity. Behind a low row of warehouses, one lot stood apart, quiet except for the occasional clank of metal and the faint scrape of claws against concrete. Within those walls, a private experiment in control was nearing its inevitable breaking point. Ahmad Firdos, a 34-year-old auto parts importer, was known as patient and meticulous. But his fascination with exotic animals was no secret. Years earlier, during a trip to Flores, he'd been captivated by the Komodo dragon. When an acquaintance offered him a hatchling, Ahmad accepted, paying in cash and never telling his family. Over the next 2 years, the reptile grew from a curious pet into a formidable presence. The pen Ahmad built behind his warehouse was solid, thick steel mesh reinforced with concrete. There are stories I've read that stay with me, not because of their grand scale, but because of their quiet, unsettling truths. The story of Ahmad is one of them. He was known for his generosity, sponsoring local youth football and offering water to delivery drivers. But within his warehouse, a different story circulated. A hushed warning passed between workers. Ahmad had acquired a Komodo dragon, a creature not meant for captivity. He kept it in a pen that seemed inadequate, built for an animal half its size. I imagine him feeding it chicken and goat meat offered by hand, a gesture of trust he believed was reciprocated. He dismissed the warnings of his employees, one named Yudi Santoso, who sensed the dragon was no longer tame. Ahmad simply smiled, convinced the animal knew him. That Thursday morning was heavy with the stillness that precedes the heat, the air thick with the scent of diesel. Ahmad had missed the previous evening's feeding, preoccupied with a problem with a shipment. He found the dragon's water basin overturned. Anxious to clean it before the day began, he opened the enclos. The animal was still in the corner. Komodo dragons, I know, can reach 10 feet in length, their bite strong enough to crush bone. Their venom, a cocktail of anticoagulants and toxins, causes rapid blood loss and shock. Ambush predators, they can move with surprising speed. I've read how captivity can make them defensive, especially if they're handled too much or not fed enough. Yudi, working in the front of the warehouse, heard a clang, a thud, then a sharp cry. He dropped his clipboard and ran. He rounded the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had sunk its teeth into Ahmad's calf. Blood darkened the concrete. Ahmad screamed, kicking with his free leg, begging Yudi for help. The dragon released, then lunged again, clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. The animal twisted its head, tearing muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and struck the dragon. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping. When it faced them again, its throat bulged with each breath, saliva dripping from its jaws. Ahmad crawled backward, leaving a trail of blood. The dragon lunged, this time catching his side, teeth sinking deep. Ahmad's scream turned into a rasp. Yudi struck again and again, until the creature finally backed away. Ahmad slumped back, eyes open, hand pressed against the wound. The concrete was dark red, the air thick with the smell of iron. Yudi dragged a burlap sack from a shelf, waving it to distract the dragon, and managed to shut the gate. But it was too late for Ahmad. The blood loss was catastrophic. He was gone before the paramedics arrived. Later, the reports confirmed multiple deep lacerations and massive internal bleeding. The venom had done its work. Veterinarians said the dragon showed signs of food aggression, triggered when a handler moved suddenly during feeding. The Komodo dragon, just under 7 feet long and weighing nearly 140 pounds, was sedated and taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center. It had been obtained through illegal trade. The story appeared briefly in the local newspapers, then disappeared beneath the usual news. But in the warehouse community, it lived on, a quiet warning. They said Ahmad had treated the dragon as a companion, never realizing that to the dragon, he was always prey. I think about how quickly life can change. One moment, everything is routine, and the next, unimaginable horror unfolds. The sanctuary, bordered by pines, sat on rolling pasture. It was early summer, strong sunlight, restless animals. I can almost smell the hay and meat from the storage shed. That morning, the enclos were quiet, except for the pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal, 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark had left the previous evening to visit his sister. He reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, he texted her around 10 p.m., receiving no reply. He assumed she was busy, then began his drive back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bear enclos half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze. Then he shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake, leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently. The bear adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Marks shouting, "Stop!" abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbour who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. It was August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp, and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive, and Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Jan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Jan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To staff, Jan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Jan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behaviour early and told Jan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Jan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m, Jan took a broom and bucket toward the enclos, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. I've always been drawn to the stories where the line between human and animal blurs, often with tragic consequences. There's something deeply unsettling about the moment when a creature we believe we understand, a pet, a companion, suddenly reverts to its wild instincts. It reminds us how thin the veneer of civilization can be. I remember reading about a lion named Simba and the chilling details of what happened on that day. I can still picture the scene in my mind so clearly, like a terrible film reel. The incident began with what seemed like a normal day. An employee named Jan approached the gate of Simba's enclos. Inside, Simba, who had been pacing, stopped. His ears perked up, and his body lowered to the ground. Jan entered, closing the inner gate but leaving the outer one slightly ajar. As he began sweeping, speaking softly, another worker filmed, drawn in by Jan's calmness. For a few moments, nothing happened. But then Simba started circling, his tail flicking sharply. The witnesses later said that Simba's behaviour changed quickly. He lowered his head, crouched, and then lunged. The impact sent Jan sprawling onto the dirt, his broom clattering away. Simba's jaws clamped around Jan's shoulder, driving him down. Jan yelled and tried to push against the lion's muzzle, but Simba shifted his grip, his teeth sinking into the back of Jan's neck. The sound of deep growling drowned out Jan's cries. Simba dragged Jan toward the shade, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Jan tried to roll onto his back, kicking at the lion's chest, but Simba's weight crushed his ribs. The broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Another employee threw water over the fence, but it only startled Simba for a second. Jan's voice faltered into short, gurgled gasps as Simba bit into his throat. The motion was efficient, final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Jan's body went limp. The growls faded into rhythmic breathing. One worker ran to the control hut to sound the alarm. The other, still holding the camera, didn't move for nearly 30 seconds. Rangers arrived within minutes, tranquilizer rifles ready. They found Simba standing over Jan's body. The lion turned toward them, shoulders low and tail flicking, and they fired 2 darts into his flank. Simba flinched, growled, and backed away before collapsing beside Jan. Once Simba was sedated, the team pulled Jan's body free. His clothing was torn and soaked with blood. The autopsy revealed crushing trauma to the neck and severe blood loss. Bite measurements confirmed a single, sustained attack consistent with defensive predation. The lodge closed that week. Simba was euthanized after sedation, and his remains were sent to a veterinary pathology lab. Officials classified the incident as preventable, citing complacency and poor safety protocols. The wife sold the property soon after, and the lion enclosures were sealed. It was October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. Not far away, birds moved between the trees, along the edge of another property. Behind a modest brick house, two large, rusty cages stood under a weathered tin awning. Inside, two chimpanzees made sharp, uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent and irreversible. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician who had worked most of her life at a local medical research facility. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for two young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 pounds, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are incredibly strong, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 pounds. Their jaws are capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1 to 1,300 pounds per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now. Feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. But that Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles, while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty panhoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. I still think about the silence that fell after the boy dropped into the chimpanzee enclosure. A silence broken only by the soft panting of the chimps themselves. For a moment, everything stopped. Then the older male, Bo, bristled with tension, his sharp hoot cutting through the air as he moved toward the boy. It's a sound some visitors later described as chilling. It was April 17th, 2015. A bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago, Illinois. Yellow school buses were pulling into a small, private animal park. A roadside zoo, really, with fading paint and rust-eaten fences. Families and school groups were milling about. The teachers trying to wrangle their students near the cramped pens holding parrots, goats, and monkeys. Near the center of the park was the chimpanzee exhibit, marked by a low chain-link railing and a shallow, algae-filled moat. A hand-painted sign warned visitors not to climb or lean on the fence. Inside, 2 adult males and a younger female lived among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The whole enclosure looked outdated, especially when compared to the habitats in larger, accredited zoos. One of the students, Matthew Collins, was a 12-year-old 6th grader on a spring field trip. His mum worked nights as a nurse, and his dad was a forklift operator. They didn't travel much, so Matthew always jumped at the chance to see animals up close. He was a bright, impulsive kid, the kind who liked to climb anything tall. He carried a second-hand camera, hoping to get the best photos of the chimps in his class. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the lingering trace of feed. As the group gathered near the chimp enclosure, Matthew found himself at the back, unable to get a clear shot. He stepped onto the lower rail for a better angle. Some classmates told him to stop, but he ignored them, focused on his shot. The railing was slick and his foot slipped. He dropped over the rail and into the pit below, landing hard. Teachers screamed. Some kids cried. Then Bo, the older chimp, stood upright and started toward him, followed by the younger male. Bo grabbed Matthew's shirt, his grip like iron. His first strike wasn't a feeding bite, but a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard clamp on the arm. The smaller male joined in, pulling at Matthew's sleeve and striking his shoulder. A zookeeper heard the commotion and ran toward the enclosure with a hose, spraying a high-press stream into the pit. It broke the chimp's focus for a few seconds. Bo would let go, slap the ground, and charge forward again, stopping just short of the water. For nearly half a minute, the chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt and retreated. But this wasn't the only incident. I remember reading about Linda, who tried to crawl toward the gate, blood pooling beneath her. Buddy grabbed her, bit her neck repeatedly. Her body stiffened, then went slack. The attack lasted less than a minute, but it stretched endlessly. The sound of skin tearing. By the time deputies arrived, the yard was silent. The chimps stood near the body, panting, blood on their hands and chest. Rosie sat beside the gate, rocking slightly. Officers tried to use tranquilizers, but Buddy charged the fence. A deputy fired 2 rifle rounds, hitting him in the chest and neck. Both animals fell inside the enclosure, their bodies still twitching as Tom was led away. Linda was found near the center of the cage, having suffered massive trauma, scalp avulsion, facial disfigurement, and multiple fractures. Her pulse was gone before help arrived. Investigators noted that the outer gate had not been locked, a lapse in Linda's usually strict routine. Tom refused interviews and moved away within months, leaving the house empty and the enclosure to rust. At the funeral, A few former co-workers remembered Linda as gentle and curious. But behind the condolences lingered a shared disbelief that a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. The enclos was later dismantled, leaving only a bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark, where the hose couldn't wash everything away. I've spent years studying the complex relationship between humans and animals, but some cases still haunt me. Take, for instance, the story of Matthew, a young man killed when a barrier failed at an animal park. Or Belinda, a woman who thought she could control a chimpanzee like a pet. Both cases reveal a tragic truth. No amount of familiarity can truly erase an animal's natural instincts. In Stamford, Connecticut, on June 11, 2014, the afternoon held an unsettling quiet. Lawnmowers hummed, cars passed along Rockledge Drive, where houses stood neatly in a row. But inside one of these ordinary homes, something extraordinary and terrible was brewing. Belinda Holmes, a 57-year-old woman, lived there, known to her neighbours for keeping a rather unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. She'd acquired him as an infant, ignoring state laws that forbade private ownership of such creatures. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, driving him around in her car. Friends said she was devoted, convinced she could control him like any other pet. For years, Charlie was a local curiosity. Children would stare as he peered out the windows. Neighbours would watch Belinda walk him on a leash through the yard. She treated him like family, defending him against anyone who voiced concerns. But there were warning signs, subtle shifts that hinted at the danger lurking beneath the surface. Charlie had grown considerably over the years. By age 12, he weighed over 120 lbs. Belinda struggled to restrain him when he became agitated, but she always insisted he was gentle, simply misunderstood. The house itself bore the marks of years spent living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged from his climbing. The air often carried a musky scent. Charlie moved freely through the rooms, from the kitchen to the living room to the small backyard. On that warm June day, with the windows open, Charlie grew restless. He paced, making noises as Belinda tried to soothe him with fruit and snacks. But years of living in a human household hadn't extinguished his natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can erupt with sudden, uncontrollable violence. There had been earlier incidents too. Months before, a neighbour had called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard. He chased cars, pounded on a vehicle before Belinda managed to bring him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends had noticed Charlie becoming irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to believe he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was unmistakable. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and bared his teeth. Belinda moved closer, attempting to grab his arm. The attack began within seconds. Charlie lunged, slamming Belinda backward onto the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrifying force. Neighbours heard the commotion through the open windows, the sounds of crashing furniture and Belinda's screams. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she desperately tried to protect herself. Blood quickly pooled on the carpet as he continued his relentless assault. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He struck her with his fists, then bit into her forearm, breaking the bone. Her screams brought neighbors rushing to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped short when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbors recoiled and called 911, their voices trembling as they described the horrifying scene unfolding before them. Police arrived within minutes. As they approached the front door, they could hear the chimp screeching and Belinda crying out in pain. Through the glass, they witnessed Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, the officers knew they had to act. They fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room, on the blood-stained carpet. The officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely conscious, her face severely disfigured, her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was extensive. She was airlifted to a trauma center with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was overturned, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she attempted to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbors gathered outside, shaken and horrified by what they had witnessed. The screams, they said, would stay with them forever. After the attack, Belinda survived, but her life was irrevocably altered. Multiple surgeries couldn't fully repair the damage, and she was left needing constant care. The case, as you might imagine, ignited a national conversation, a reckoning, really, about the profound dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. Connecticut, in response, tightened its laws, ultimately banning private chimpanzee ownership outright. The house itself? It was eventually sold, though the new owners, of course, knew the story that clung to the property. I remember reading about another incident, years later, that felt almost like a terrible echo. It was May 28, 2017, a Memorial Day weekend. The setting was deceptively peaceful. The outskirts of Austin, Texas, along a bend of the Colorado River. Families had gathered for a barbecue at a privately rented picnic site. A quiet patch of grass, bordered by live oaks and open water. Children played, adults unpacked food. But one guest had brought an animal that most people only ever see safely behind glass. The victim that day was Daniel Ortiz, a 36-year-old high school track coach. He was known for his steadiness, always prepared, the kind of person who brought extra water and sunscreen for those who forgot. He'd finished a run and stopped by the barbecue after a friend's text. He saw the small crowd near the tables and walked over, simply curious. Daniel, it seemed, had a natural comfort around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter, helping calm anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept his distance, respectful, staying behind a low trash can. The chimp wore a harness, and the owner was talking with onlookers, handing out small pieces of fruit. Daniel wanted a photo, just one clear shot to show his students, proof of the strange thing he'd seen on a normal Sunday. He moved forward a few feet angling for a clean shot past the cluster of people. The chimp, though, was restless, pacing on the leash, sniffing, reaching. A thin musk drifted on the air, mixing with the smoke from the grills. Adult male chimpanzees, I've learned, are simply not suited for public gatherings. Dominance in their social groups is enforced with sudden violence, and years of human handling can't erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, food competition. These can trigger those instincts in seconds. A city ordinance banned exotic animals within Austin, but this site was just outside the city limits, and few people there realized the handler lacked the proper permits. A couple stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler holding a red cup. The owner shortened the leash but kept feeding it fruit. A runner passing by called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, waiting for the chimp to settle so he could take that one steady shot. The tension, I can only imagine, was building. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry and grunted, eyes fixed on moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened around his wrist. Daniel stepped closer, maybe 2 feet, to avoid someone's shoulder in his frame. And then the chimp wheeled toward the movement. For a beat, everything held still except the wind. The lunge covered the gap in a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. His phone flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. The first bite hit his forearm, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free, but the chimp's grip did not loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams rose from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him on his side. Daniel tried to roll, to get his feet under him, but the chimp climbed up his torso and hammered his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall. In the scramble, the leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket and streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed. One man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung an arm and knocked him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked and landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds, they were distinct and awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, and short grunts from Daniel every time teeth met bone. A woman dragged 2 children backward by their shirts as the owner crawled toward the leash, hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest and pull it toward a picnic table leg, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles and tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing worked. Emergency calls went out within seconds, yet the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sound that had echoed there just hours before. I've always been struck by how quickly things can change, how a seemingly normal situation can devolve into chaos in an instant. It was September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles. The sun was out, and a small production studio was buzzing with activity. They were setting up for a simple animal demonstration, a chimpanzee for a daytime talk show. But the press of the lights, the heat, and the unfamiliar faces would prove too much for the animal. Kevin Harris, an experienced animal trainer, had been working with animals for 2 decades. His work wasn't glamorous. School assemblies, local commercials, small TV projects. This talk show appearance was just another paycheck. The chimp, Mike, was 13 years old and had been with Kevin since he was a baby. At 125 pounds, Mike was strong, intelligent, and, when stressed, unpredictable. Kevin believed Mike knew the rhythm of production life, that he could stay calm amidst the noise and movement. But those familiar with chimps knew that adulthood changes everything, that males who once tolerated crowds can grow volatile as their dominance instincts sharpen. The set was modest, just a sofa, a coffee table, and a backdrop under hot studio lights. Mike sat on a stool beside Kevin, wearing only a collar and leash. He was restless, tugging at the strap, his eyes darting around the room. Before the cameras started rolling, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing signs of stress, pacing, baring his teeth, pulling sharply on the lead. But the director insisted they proceed, as the schedule was tight. Kevin re-asked everyone, offering Mike pieces of banana to calm him. The tension seemed to ease, at least for a moment. As recording began, the room brightened. The host smiled, reading her lines. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave, a trick they had rehearsed countless times. For a few seconds, everything went as planned. Then the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. His shoulders hunched, his lips curled. A low pant hoot echoed through the studio. Kevin turned, his voice soft, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the fragile balance. The chimp lunged. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward, the stool clattering. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room erupted in noise, shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment. Someone yelled to cut the power. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm just below the elbow. The bite tore through muscle and tendons. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin twisted, trying to free himself. The chimp released and struck again. Another bite to the shoulder. Another blow with his fists. The host ran off set. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked a camera housing. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical, each sound matching a strike or a bite. Kevin's movement slowed. His left arm hung limp. A crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray clouded the air, coating the floor in white dust. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, teeth bared and streaked with red. Security burst in. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him farther away from Kevin, who lay motionless on the floor. Animal control officers arrived within minutes. They tranquilized Mike, the dart striking his shoulder as he bared his teeth. He staggered before collapsing beside the toppled couch, his eyes fluttering. Kevin survived, but barely. Paramedics stabilized him before rushing him to a trauma center. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and much of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. Then I came across another story, this one from October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortal Highway in western Uganda. I've always been drawn to the edges where the wild world brushes against our own. The roadside clearings where chimpanzees appear in Uganda. I can almost see it. The green ridges, the walls of vegetation pressing close. To photograph one of those chimps against that backdrop, it's the kind of image that stays with you. Martin, he was driven by that same desire for unique images, maybe a little too much. He'd photographed gorillas and monkeys before, so he knew the field. But sometimes that ambition pushed him close to the edge. He parked near a bend, camera slung over his shoulder, and started walking. A local motorbike rider shouted a warning, gesturing towards the trees, but Martin waved it off. He seemed to think the real danger was the speeding trucks around those blind corners. The highway there cuts sharply through the green, and traffic comes in bursts, leaving long stretches of silence filled only with the forest sounds. On one side, a red dirt slope rises almost 20 feet, draped with vines. On the other, trees lean low over a drop into dense undergrowth. It was along these margins that the chimpanzees sometimes appeared, climbing across embankments or descending into the ditches. Their habitat is shrinking, you see, and the edge of the asphalt has become just another boundary they patrol. And when startled or challenged, aggression is their first response. I remember reading the rangers at the visitor centre warned tourists to stay inside their vehicles when driving those roads. Truck drivers reported seeing chimps near bends, where fruit trees grew close to the highway. Locals avoided walking alone there, especially in the morning when the animals were most active. Martin had been told all of this at his lodge the night before, but he dismissed it, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas under stricter conditions. Only a few minutes into his walk, he saw movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge. Behind him, two smaller chimps lingered in the plants. Martin raised his camera, crouching low for a clear angle. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The two younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in for a close shot, stepping forward into the lane, unaware that the chimp had begun to climb down toward him. The descent took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the gap on all fours. Martin lowered the camera just as the animal charged. dark arms swinging with sudden speed. The first impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding across the pavement. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite clamped onto his forearm, tearing skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting as he watched. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled quickly on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps appeared briefly from the tree line, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones from the roadside, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll weakly onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds: raw. The rasp of Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel as the struggle shifted back and forth. The assault lasted only a few minutes, though to the witnesses it felt far longer before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and Martin was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep press on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images. The forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.